Good morning, Joey. How are you today?
Great, how are you?
I am fine. I'm excited about this workshop. We are going to move into the third and final way that commas are used in our sentences. If you'll remember, in our last workshop, we looked at commas to introduce independent clauses and commas to help connect independent clauses. And that was a pretty short workshop and things were pretty straightforward. Today's workshop's going to be a little bit more difficult and a little bit more complicated. It's going to be longer than last week's, but again, you have the luxury of going back and watching the video again. And those of you all that are joining us to watch the video also have the luxury of pausing, going back over things, and then reviewing the video several times to make sure you fully understand these slightly more complicated concepts with regards to commas used to separate. And again, this is what we did last week, to introduce independent clauses and to help connect independent clauses. And we're going to look today at how commas are used to separate like items, interrupters, and non-essential elements. So let's start with the easy ones, like items. In a series, whenever you list 3 or more items in a series, you need to use commas to separate each item. And let's see why this is so important. Let's pretend for a moment that John's mother sent him this text asking him to stop at the store and purchase a lot of items, but the mom did not put commas to separate the individual items. So John is standing there at the grocery store looking for peanut butter yogurt. So for all these new flavors for yogurt, where's the peanut butter yogurt? He can't find it. So he asks the sales clerk, and the sales clerk says, "Hey, I've never heard of such a thing as peanut butter yogurt." John shows her the text, and she says, because she had just watched this video, and she says, "Wait a minute, I think your mom forgot to put commas to separate the like items. I suspect that there should be a comma between peanut butter and yogurt." Okay, so then John says, "Okay, so now I guess it's not yogurt chocolate. There should be a comma there. Now, I wonder if my mom wants chocolate and ice cream. I've never seen her eat chocolate ice cream, but you know, people change. Does this mean she wants her favorite chocolate and her favorite ice cream? Or does she want me to get chocolate ice cream? I don't know." The clerk says, "I don't know either, but let's assume that she wants chocolate and ice cream." Okay, now, does she want garlic and bread, or does she want garlic bread? So Joey looks further, John looks further down the list and says, "Wait a minute, here's garlic. So I'm going to suspect that she wants garlic bread. And sliced turkey gizzards? Never heard of such a thing. We're going to assume that that's sliced turkey and gizzards and garlic. And then let's not forget that important Oxford comma that comes in front of and. When's the other time we put a comma in front of and, Joey? Do you remember?
Yes, when you're using fanboys for connecting
Connecting what?
two independent clauses.
Excellent, good for you. And this is the only other time you will see a comma in front of and, is when you're connecting 3 or more items in a series. So now we have all of our commas that are used to separate the like items in the list. So don't be like John's mother. When you list 3 or more things in a series, make sure that you separate all of your items with commas so that your readers understand exactly what each item is. All right. Does this make sense?
Yes.
Okay, good. Any questions about that?
Nope. I think I got it.
All right. Well, then let's move on, because there's one other way that we use commas to separate that like items, and that's when we have 2 or more adjectives describing the same noun. 2 or more adjectives describing the same noun. Now, there's 2 things that you can do with these 2 adjectives. In some situations, you can connect them with and in other situations, you can separate them with a comma. So let's look at some examples of that. The small fragile ornament fell from the tree. Do you see 2 adjectives describing the same noun, Joey?
Yes. small and fragile.
Could we say the small and fragile ornament fell from the tree?
Yeah,
We could. But we have to make a decision here. Which do we like the best? Do we like the small fragile ornament fell from the tree, or do we like the small and fragile ornament fell from the tree?
I like the first one. with the-
I do too. And there are some situations where you really do have a choice and both sound good, but most of the time one is going to sound better than the other. Yep. And you do not put a comma with and when you make a decision. You're either going to connect those two adjectives with and, or you're going to separate them with a comma, but you do not use both. Now let's look at this one. The ornament that fell from the tree was small and fragile. Now, this is a perfect use for and. It doesn't make sense to say the ornament that fell from the tree was small, fragile. That doesn't work. So when you have two adjectives, make sure that you make the very best decision. Are you going to connect them with and, or are you going to separate them with a comma? So let's practice. That was all pretty straightforward. Let's look at these sentences. And Joey, would you like to read them out loud?
Sure. Because the winters are so short and mild, some homes don't have central heat. I spent most of my life in Michigan, so I am used to long, cold winters. Here in Central Florida, we have long and hot summers.
So which of these has an incorrectly placed comma separating like items?
Would be C,
Yep, because you've got that comma with and.
the and.
How would you fix that one, Joey?
Just take the comma out.
Long and hot summers. Have long and hot summers, or you could take the and out.
Mhm.
This is one of those situations where you could do either. We have long and hot summers. We have long, comma, hot summers. So this is a situation where you could do it either way. Does that make sense, Joey?
Yes.
All right. Let's move on to the next one. Which of the following has all the commas correctly placed?
Okay, so A, I saw a big hairy dog playing with a duck, a dolphin, and a ball. I saw a big hairy dog playing with a duck, a dolphin, and a ball. And I saw a big hairy dog playing with a duck, a dolphin, and a ball. Okay, so I think that the correct one is B.
Good job. So what's wrong with A?
The big and hairy both describe dogs, so it needs a comma.
Okay. And what's wrong with C?
There's no comma before and.
Because and you're connecting three things. And I want to take a moment here. I'm going to stop our little dancing bee because he can be a little annoying. And I want to talk to you for a minute about this comma and in B. You might think that the comma and the and are doing the same job, but actually they're not. The commas are separating the individual items and the and is connecting them, because remember, your fanboys are connectors. So and is actually connecting the duck, the dolphin, and the ball. I saw a big hairy dog playing with a duck and a dolphin and a ball. We don't need to put that and in every single one. As long as we put and after the last two and add that comma, it is understood that and is connecting all of the items while the commas are separating all of the items. Does that make sense, Joey?
Yes.
Yeah. And connects, the commas separate. All right, let's move on to this one. Which of the following sentences has an incorrectly placed comma?
Okay. I will finish my degree at Valencia, move to Orlando, and attend UCF. I will finish my degree at Valencia and move to Orlando to attend UCF. Before moving to Orlando to attend UCF, I will finish my degree at Valencia. Ooh, that's a hard one. I think B.
B is incorrect. And what makes it incorrect?
Well, if you put the comma before and, in this case, it's not a list, so it has to be an independent clause, and it's not an independent clause.
Very good, Joey. Very good. And you are absolutely correct.
Woohoo.
Okay, so now let's move on about commas to use to separate interrupters. An interrupter is a word or a group of words that kind of splits your clause wide open and slaps itself down in the middle. When that happens, you put a comma on either side of the interrupter to separate it from the clause. I like to think of these commas as little bitty handles that you can use those little handles to lift the interrupter out of your sentence, read the sentence without it, and see if you have everything you need there. Sometimes some of these interrupters might be a conjunctive adverb, a verbal phrase, or a prepositional phrase, and that word or group of words will plop right down in the middle of the clause and interrupt it. So let's look at this. Going back to John and his wife. John loves to swim. His wife is afraid of water. Two independent clauses. If I put my however, instead of beginning my new sentence with however, if I decide to use however as an interrupter, I'm going to enclose that interrupter in commas and separate it from the rest of the independent clause. Now, you may remember when we talked about connecting independent clauses, I cautioned you and our viewers that every time you see a word like however, don't automatically put a semicolon in front of it. We use that semicolon comma formula with conjunctive adverbs when we are connecting two independent clauses. We put a comma after however at the beginning of a sentence to introduce the independent clause. So listen to this. John loves to swim. However, his wife is afraid of water. John loves to swim. His wife, however, is afraid of water. Do you hear the difference in the rhythm?
Yes.
Yeah, and so it's good to know all of the different rhythms you can create with your sentences to keep your reader interested and alert to what you're writing. Those are style decisions. Let's look at another sentence from our connecting clauses. Sue saw a rainbow. Let's look at how a verbal phrase, instead of introducing this independent clause, how that verbal phrase can interrupt the independent clause. Sue, driving to Orlando, saw a rainbow. And there are our little commas to separate the interrupter from the independent clause. I could have used driving to Orlando to introduce my independent clause and written the sentence driving to Orlando, comma, Sue saw a rainbow. Sue, driving to Orlando, saw a rainbow. Both are correct as long as I am using my commas correctly. Any questions so far, Joey?
No.
What if I were to say Sue saw a rainbow driving to Orlando?
I'd be
Does that work?
I would be confused because it sounds like the rainbow's driving.
I know, and your reader has to think, wait a minute, rainbows don't drive. But what if Sue is the one driving, and instead of a rainbow, she saw her brother? Driving to Orlando, Sue saw her brother. Makes perfect sense. Sue driving to Orlando saw her brother. But if I were to say Sue saw her brother driving to Orlando, I've completely changed the meaning of my sentence. So where we place these verbal phrases in our sentences is very important. And we will be doing a workshop later that talks about placing verbal phrases and other types of modifiers in the correct place. But for today, we are going to look at commas to separate interrupters. What about prepositional phrases? Howard called a supervisor. In spite of advice from Ed. There's a prepositional phrase. I could say in spite of advice from Ed, comma, Howard called a supervisor. But if I want to change my rhythm a little bit, I can put this prepositional phrase in the middle of my independent clause. Does this make sense, Joey?
Yeah.
So let's look at a group of words called appositives. Appositives are not phrases. And a positive is an interrupter that contains a noun renaming the noun in front of the interrupter. Sounds a little confusing, but we do this all the time. And a positive can be a single word or a group of words. Let's look at, there's the noun, my brother is visiting next week. Let's stick a positive in here that has a noun that renames brother. Doesn't describe brother. The noun replaces brother. There's an appositive. And we separate appositives with commas. Sometimes an appositive is a single word. My dog Sassy was the best pet I have ever had. Is this making sense, Joey?
Yes.
Okay. And sometimes you can have back-to-back appositives. My neighbor helps the elderly couple next door. Well, what's his name? My neighbor Miguel, renaming neighbor with his actual name. But then what if I want another appositive in there? A very kind man. My neighbor Miguel, a very kind man, helps the elderly couple next door. So you can have back-to-back appositives. And when you do, you need to make sure that they are separated from each other and from the clause, my neighbor helps the elderly couple next door. Is this making sense, Joey?
Yeah.
Do you have any questions?
No, I think I got it.
Sometimes a dependent clause will plop down in the middle of an independent clause. This happens a lot with our relative pronouns. We talked about relative pronouns briefly in a couple of our previous workshops. Now we're going to look at them a little more closely. Do you by any chance remember what the relative pronouns are? It was a long time ago. It's okay if you don't.
Someone.
No, those are independent. That's okay. There are 7 of them. They are who,
where, okay, yeah.
Who, whom, which, that, whoever, and whomever. Those are the 7 relative pronouns. Relative pronouns begin a dependent clause, and that dependent clause is going to act like an adjective. My brother, who is a very successful doctor. Now notice I turned to my appositive, a very successful doctor, into an adjective clause. I added who as my subject and is as my verb. My brother, who is a very successful doctor, is visiting next week. Questions about that?
No, I got it.
Yeah. Keep in mind your relative pronouns can be the subject of a verb. Who is a very successful doctor. Your verb is, your subject is who, and the relative pronoun who is replacing brother so that it can become the subject of a new verb. Because I can't say my brother is a very successful doctor is visiting next week.
Right.
So I have to have a new subject for the verb is, which is why I'm going to use this relative pronoun to replace the noun brother, because that's what pronouns do, and become the subject of this verb in this dependent clause. Let's look at another one. Let's take the appositive Sassy and turn it into an adjective clause. My dog, whose name was Sassy, was the best pet I have ever had. And again, we need those commas separating our dependent clause from our independent clause. I'd like you to notice that these clauses, these dependent clauses, come right after the noun that they are describing. That is the only place they can come, is right after the noun they are describing. My neighbor, who is very kind, helps the elderly couple next door. There is no place else to put these adjective dependent clauses except immediately after the noun they are describing. My brother is visiting next week, who is a very successful doctor. My dog was the best pet I have ever had, whose name was Sassy. My neighbor helps the elderly couple next door, who is very kind. And you can't put them in front of the sentence. They have to come immediately after the noun they are describing, which means you have to split that independent clause in two so that you can put that adjective clause right after the noun it's describing. So we tend to think of adjectives as single words, right? When we looked at our earlier slides, the adjectives were single words, but adjectives can also be a clause. So each of these dependent clauses has two things in common. They each begin with a relative pronoun, and each one is an adjective clause. And you can always consult the Oracle, i.e. the internet, and type in adjective clauses, relative pronouns, and see more information about these words and about these types of clauses. But now we have to really get complicated. Commas used to separate non-essential details. And I'm going to just let you know that every single interrupter that we looked at, that we had separated with commas, every one of those was not contain non-essential details. Non-essential does not equal not important. Essential doesn't equal important. Things can be important and not essential. Essential for what? What do we absolutely need some details for? If the interrupter has information in it that is essential to identify a noun in the sentence, the interrupter should not be separated with commas. So essential to identify a noun, that is the important part to remember there. And now we're going to look at some examples. The student was able to pass the class. The student was able to pass the class. I'm going to put interrupters in here, and I want you to help me, Joey, decide if the information in these prepositional phrases identifies the student. The student with help from a tutor was able to pass the class. The student with the purple and orange backpack was able to pass the class.
So the second one describes the student.
And we need to know, we need this information to know which student we're talking about, right?
Right.
So let's look at these interrupters. What about with help from the tutor? Does that identify the student we're talking about?
No.
It does not. And because it does not, we're going to separate that one with commas. But we are not going to separate with the purple and orange backpack because we need that information to identify which student we're talking about. Let's look at another one. Customers must be treated with respect. Customers must be treated with respect. Who have complaints and who are the main reason we have jobs. Which of these contains identifying information?
Who have complaints?
Okay, so if it contains identifying information, should we separate it with commas?
No.
That's good. Questions so far?
No.
Remember, essential does not equal important. And when we say essential, we're talking about identifying information. And again, let's think about these commas as little handles. If I lift the commas, if I use those commas as little handles and imagine that I am lifting that entire interrupter out of my sentence, examine it and say, is there information that identifies what's in left a noun in the rest of the sentence? And if so, let's put it back and get rid of the commas because we don't want handles. We don't want to be able to lift something out that contains essential information. I have just found the little commas as handles to be very helpful when I'm having to make a decision. Should I enclose this interrupter in commas? Should I separate it from the rest of my sentence or not? So the little handle metaphor works very well for me, and I hope that others will find it helpful. All right, and there's the rule again. If the interrupter has information in it that identifies a noun in the sentence, the interrupter should not be separated with commas. So let's have a little fun with this rule. Okay. And this is a little, for those of us that are kind of grammar nerds, this is a fun little thing to do just to play with someone at a party or in a little get together. Give them these two sentences. The woman who wore a red dress won the election. The woman who wore a red dress won the election, with commas to separate in one sentence and no separating commas in the second. And say, one of the sentences above lets readers know exactly how many women ran in the election. Which sentence? Now, again, remember your commas, remember your handles, lift the information out and say, what's left? One of the sentences above lets readers know exactly how many women ran in the election. Which sentence gives us that information?
The first one.
Okay, and so if we lift that out, who wore a red dress, and we set it aside and we look at the sentence and say the woman won the election, how many women were running? If that's all the information the readers know, only one. That's exactly right. Whereas in the second sentence, we need that information to know which woman won, which means there must have been more than one. Good job. This is a little bit of nerdy fun. All right, so let's do a little quick review. Commas to separate, like items. When listing 3 or more items in a series, comma should be used to separate each item. What kind of comma is this, Joey? Do you remember from our first workshop on commas?
It is, that's a dependent clause first. So it separates it from the independent clause. Comma should be used to separate each item.
Actually, it's a comma used to introduce the independent clause. So when listing 3 or more items in a series, comma, here comes my independent clause, comma should be used to separate each item. That's okay. You're getting it. It's just trying to remember, and we're going to do a little review of that too. 2 or more adjectives describing the same noun should be connected with and or separated with a comma. And when it comes to interrupters, when a conjunctive adverb, verbal or prepositional phrase, a positive or dependent clause interrupts the flow of an idea, comma, again, there's another introducing comma. Here comes my independent clause. The interrupting element should be enclosed in commas to separate it from the rest of the sentence. What am I doing with these commas up here? Conjunctive adverb, comma, verbal or prepositional phrase, comma, a positive comma, or dependent clause. What are those commas doing?
A list, separating items.
There you go. Good job. And here's the exception. Unless the information in the interrupter identifies an element in the sentence and is therefore essential information. And what are these commas doing around therefore?
Separating a conjunctive adverb.
Yep. And it's not essential. Therefore, it's enclosed in commas. I can use those little handles, lift that out, and my reader still has all the information they need. Unless the information in the interrupter identifies an element in the sentence and is essential information. Right? And the therefore just enforces the cause and effect relationship. All right, now let's practice. Which of the following sentences has an unnecessary comma? Would you like to read them out loud, Joey?
Okay. Here in Florida, known as the Sunshine State, we seldom ever see snow. I donated most of my heavy sweaters and coats after I moved to Florida. When the threat of frost occurs, farmers, including citrus growers, go to great lengths to protect their winter crops. Okay, so A is okay. I don't understand. I think B is wrong.
B is wrong. And I think you struggled with C.
Yeah.
That is a very complex sentence. So let's break C down before we move on. When the threat of frost occurs, comma. Here comes my independent clause, right?
Right.
Farmers, including citrus growers, go to great lengths to protect their winter crops. Now, isn't that interesting that that little comma after occurs is doing two things? Well, actually, it's only doing one thing. It's introducing my independent clause. But now look at the comma after farmers and the comma after citrus growers. Let's use those as little handles and lift that including citrus growers out of our sentence. And now let's look at it. When the threat of frost occurs, farmers go to great lengths to protect their winter crops.
Right. Still makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. So now we can take our little handles, put our little interrupter back in place, and have just some important information, but it's not essential because it doesn't identify the farmers. It's just reminding us that citrus growers are also farmers. Good job, Joey. What's wrong with B?
You don't need a comma after I moved to Florida, after I moved to Florida.
That's right. ICDC requires no comma. Okay, a whole paragraph. All right, which sentence has an incorrectly punctuated interrupter? Would you like me to read this out loud?
Sure.
Okay, let's
Thank
give
you,
let's
Professor.
give you a chance to rest your voice. It seems that many people are changing their diets for more healthy choices. For example, the organic food industry has been steadily growing over the last 20 years. Okay, so far so good. Everything looks good. C, many people who want to eat healthier, however, can't afford to purchase organically grown produce and other foods. What do you think about C?
I think it needs another comma
Where would you put that other comma?
where the however is.
In front of however, so we can lift however out. Okay, so let's do those two little commas. Let's lift however out. And maybe that comma, well, wait a minute, maybe that comma after healthier is doing two jobs. Maybe it's also separating who want to eat healthier, because I've got a comma in front of who. If I put that comma between healthier and however, it's going to do a dual function.
Mhm.
So do I need who want to eat healthier? Is that going to identify? If I just say many people can't afford to purchase organically grown produce and other foods, does that who want to eat healthier identify the people I'm talking about?
Yes.
It does. So what do you think? Do I need that comma after people?
No.
I don't think so. So I think we got a couple of things wrong here. I think we should have that sentence say, many people who want to eat healthier, comma, however, comma, can't afford to purchase organically grown produce and other foods. It's really important when we're doing our final proofreading in our own writing to carefully and slowly read each sentence out loud. And if we've got commas in that sentence, make sure that we can understand exactly what each comma is doing. Let's go ahead and make sure everything else is correct. Another issue is that organic food is not available in many areas, comma, such as rural areas and intercity neighborhoods. That's a stylistic choice right there. Could have a comma, could not have a comma. It depends on whether this information is identifying the areas or just giving examples of some areas. So we're going to assume that the writer knew what they were doing there, because that could, it's just like the, who won the election, right? Even fresh, comma, non-organic produce. What's that comma doing, Joey, between fresh and non-organic?
Separating two adjectives.
Perfect. Non-organic produce is in short supply in many areas, comma, and customers have very limited choices for healthy fruits and vegetables. And what's this comma doing in front of and? What do you suppose we're doing there?
That's a fanboys, so it's in front of an independent clause.
And do we have two independent clauses in this sentence?
Yes.
Good.
It is.
Yes, we do. These areas are considered food deserts because healthy food is in short supply. So the only issue I saw for sure was in C. And thank you for helping me figure out how to fix that, Joey. All right, which of the following sentences has all the commas correctly placed?
Okay. John, however, as much as he wants to go, has decided to stay home and catch up on work. As much as he wants to go, John, however. I think that's correct.
Okay.
And then the second one, the biggest issues are lack of funding, lack of interest, and lack of personnel. And we went shopping and bought groceries, toiletries, cleaning supplies, and dog food. So the other two are wrong because the biggest issues are you don't need a comma before the list.
Good.
And then the second one, you need a comma before the and.
Perfect. Good job. Yeah, that one was a little tough, but you did fantastic. Yep, I love the way you dissected it and looked at the comma usage. Brilliant. All right, but it's a little more difficult sometimes to find missing commas, right?
Okay.
If we're looking at our own proofreading, our own writing, and we're looking at the commas that are there, we can, now that we understand the rules, it's easier to decide whether we need that comma or not. But when there's a comma missing, that's sometimes a little bit more difficult to spot. So let's see if we can figure out which of the following sentences has a missing comma around an interrupter.
Okay, so I realized while driving home that I had not eaten dinner, so I stopped at the market. I realized while driving home that I had not eaten dinner, so I stopped at the market. While driving home, I realized that I had not eaten dinner, so I stopped at the market. So the one that makes it confusing to read out loud is A. So I think it needs an extra comma after I realized while driving home, after home.
Absolutely, because the main idea is I realized that I had not eaten dinner. Right? Okay, cool. And what is the comma in front of so doing?
That's another fanboy, so it's an independent clause. I stopped at the market.
Good, 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 good. Do you have questions about any of the other sentences, Joey?
No.
Good. Yep. Which of the following sentences needs commas around an interrupter?
Okay, children whose parents read to them are more likely to enjoy reading as adults. Children whose attention span is shorter than most adults enjoy short books with lots of pictures, and children whose parents set healthy boundaries tend to be better behaved in public. That's hard. Okay.
So what you're doing now is you're determining between essential and
Essential and
non-essential information for identification.
I think C is essential, so it does not need a comma. And B, I don't know, that's confusing. I think children enjoy reading as adults. Enjoy short books, lots of pictures.
Why don't you try reading each sentence without the interrupter?
I just did that. So children, well, I did that in my head. So children are more likely to enjoy reading as adults. So it tells you which kind of children are more likely to enjoy. So I think you need that. I think it's essential.
So try reading B without the interrupter.
Children enjoy short books with lots of pictures. Okay, so that one might need it because you're describing in general children.
Yeah, there's no identifying information. It's not identifying a particular group of children.
Right.
A is identifying a particular group of children. C is identifying a particular group of children. And that identification information is in the interrupter. Therefore, we
Right.
cannot separate it. B is talking about all children. There's nothing whose attention span is shorter than most adults. That's just describing children in general. There's no identifying information.
Mhm.
Good. Yeah, that was hard. That was hard. As I said earlier, figuring out when we need commas is sometimes more difficult than identifying a comma that is unnecessary. Okie dokie. So let's do a little review. All the comma rules in the English language can be narrowed down to 3 ways commas are used. Commas are used to introduce. Commas are used to help connect. And commas are used to separate. And what are they used to introduce, Joey?
Commas are used to introduce, see, at the beginning of a sentence. So I don't I don't understand what the question is there.
Independent clauses. They are used to introduce independent clauses. Does that make sense? Remember
Yeah.
now?
Mhm.
Okay. And what are they used to help connect?
They are used to help connect like items
Independent clauses.
or 2 or more adjectives.
Yeah, no, that's to separate. They're used to connect independent clauses. These are from our first workshop.
Oh, for the first workshop. I'm sorry. That's why I got confused.
No, I should have said that. I was
Professor.
reviewing everything from both workshops. I should have.
I
made
got
that
it.
clear. Got it.
Mhm.
They are from our first workshop. We learned that commas are used to introduce independent clauses. Let me clarify our first workshop on commas because we've done a
Yes.
lot of workshops. Our first workshop on commas, we looked at commas to introduce independent clauses, and we looked at commas to help connect independent clauses. In this workshop, we've looked at all of the ways commas are used to separate. So now you're on track. What are some of the things they're used to separate?
Like items, interrupters, and non-essentials.
Like items in a series, interrupters, and non-essential details. And I left one out. Like items, not only like items in a series, but also like items when there are 2 or more adjectives. So I forgot to add that to our review. So don't forget that when you have 2 or more adjectives describing the same noun, you either separate them with a comma or you connect them with and.
Okay.
All right. So this was fun. We have finished all of the major concepts in our grammar boot camp so far. We're going to take a short break. And at some point, Joey, we may come back together and look at some more minor details with grammar boot camp. But thank you so much. I hope this has helped you and that you can share this information with others. And for those of you that have been watching, we appreciate you being here. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Professor Abby.